I can see a scenario where actually having an even more diverse job share, or having a diverse job share, would be an even greater way of including more voices and having different perspectives and an even richer experience potentially for that job share.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leadership, digital culture and change. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast brings you interviews with leaders from the public and private and third sector who are using digital to navigate uncertainty and forge a path to the future.
In this episode, we have a double header for you. We're speaking to Beth Parfitt, Head of Digital at Tearfund, and Kit Powney, Head of Digital and Digital Maturity, also at Tearfund. Beth and Kit job share the role of Head of Digital, with Beth working 4 days and Kit 1 day a week. We were really intrigued to hear about the success that they're making of their role together and how they split projects and responsibilities between them. Our conversation took place just a couple of weeks ago and we couldn't wait to share it with you. We cover the importance of diversity, asynchronous working, and the role that strong leadership has played in making their approach to work so possible and so valuable. Beth and Kit were such a joy to talk to and a real breath of fresh air. And speaking of fresh air, Paul, did you happen to catch much of the Glastonbury coverage last weekend?
Yeah, I did, although I must admit that I replaced the fresh air of Somerset with my sofa, a fridge filled with food and beer, and easy access to a clean toilet. So to my shame, I've only ever been to Glastonbury once in 1997, so long overdue another visit, but made the most of my licence fee and watched hours and hours of music on the BBC, on the iPlayer and online. So how about you? Did you see any of the coverage?
No, I didn't catch it, although normally I do. So I'll definitely be catching up with it on iPlayer. And before this recording started, we were talking about how Glastonbury is in many ways already a hybrid event, even before the coverage that we just saw last weekend. And you and I were reminiscing about how we've caught various sets by various acts on TV over the last few years. And Glastonbury's really been a hybrid event for quite some time now. It's just no one's actually called it that.
Yeah, and I think it's that as long as the BBC and Glastonbury keep up that relationship, then I'm sure it will be. And I think it's great because there's such high demand for the tickets. Tickets for Glastonbury go really, really quickly, and it can be quite tough to get them. And also, I think for a lot of people, it's quite a commitment to go for those 4 days. You know, you have to get there on a Wednesday or Thursday. So I was thinking about taking the kids, take them out of school for 2 days, which is obviously frowned upon. And so it becomes quite difficult. So being able to tune in via the iPlayer was absolutely fantastic. And also because you can skip around from stage to stage really easily and not miss a thing. Whereas I remember my experience of going to Glastonbury, you're looking at the timetable of the acts that are going to be on and trying to figure out if you can get to where you want to be to see the next set. So even if you're, watching, I don't know, Billie Eilish or wanting to get to Billie Eilish at the main stage, if you're over at the other stage, it can be quite a hike to get there. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think it is that sort of that hybrid. If you think back to the episode we did about the Montreux Jazz Festival, for example, it was very, very similar. Well, there are lots of online content that are, an event that people could go along to. And I think the BBC have even started to sort of expand that to festivals like Reading. I think also has a bit of quite a big TV coverage. And I think ITV had Isle of Wight, but not to the extent the BBC do Glastonbury.
Wow, and perfect for middle-aged people like us as well, who definitely prefer our sofas and the home comforts of just staying at home and readily available snacks, not having to trek too far.
Exactly, and I think we can give you a curated experience, so you can catch up with what happened. Highlights for me, I think Saturday afternoon, I think it was, that Haim were on. I think they are three sisters from the US who have been around. I think it was about their 7th time playing Glastonbury, but absolutely rocked that main stage. They were really, really good. Really like Wet Leg on the opening day. And then Phoebe Bridgers and Billie Eilish were really quite impressive. I didn't see, and I haven't caught up yet with all of Kendrick Lamar's set from the Sunday night, because we were watching Pet Shop Boys, who had technical difficulties but managed to make it through.
Oh
They
no!
were really good.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but so exactly. But it was great, and I can, we can sort of catch up with that. But it did make me think that actually there's one sort of thing, and I always want to get a reference to football in, but those Saturday afternoon 3:00 matches have never been televised in the UK. So they televise lunchtime and evening games and midweek games and things like that. But that 3:00 Saturday afternoon is held sacred, because the understanding is that if they were to try and put that on the TV, then people wouldn't go to the stadiums. And I think it's nonsense. I think the audience that wants to go to stadiums will go to stadiums in exactly the same way as the people who want to go to Glastonbury will go to Glastonbury. But giving that alternative for people to tune in and watch from wherever they are just makes a lot of sense. But talking of last Friday, it was a dark day as well as having Glastonbury on.
Very much so. A really, really difficult day for everyone. So this is obviously a really dark day for women's rights in the US, with the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. In fact, we heard many voices, female and male, voicing their opposition from the stages of Glastonbury, from Phoebe Bridgers to Billie Eilish, Lord, Olivia Rodrigo and Kendrick Lamar, to name but a few. And there were immediate calls from women like Gina Neff, Professor of Technology and Society at the University of Oxford, to delete menstrual tracking apps and data. And there's been subsequent debate about what data is being captured and shared by the technology we all use day to day. So there's a big question, isn't there, about the access that tech companies have to this data. Are they going to be sharing that data? Was a question that you and I were talking about before this call, and also whether women are actually going to feel safe to keep tracking that stuff, or they're going to have to do it in different ways.
And how that stuff is different across different states in the US as well. And I think there's a huge immediate issue. I saw lots of debate straight away on Twitter. The tech organizations themselves, the companies themselves that create these apps and create these opportunities for women to track their data, talking about encryption and talking about being able to encrypt them. But then the knock-on effect to that is, if you are prosecuted, which just sounds awful, doesn't it? But if you are prosecuted for having an abortion in certain states in the US, then they can actually seize and subpoena people. They can seize phones, they can seize technology, and in that instance, your data isn't encrypted. So I can see the panic. And the other thing that I thought was worthy of mention, and I know those tracking apps exist within the Apple products that I use. Obviously, I've not got any cause to use them, but I was always under the impression, and maybe naively, that I was reasonably safe with Apple. But there was a statement or a fact in the BBC article that we'll share in the notes. In 2021, the New York Times reported that in the first 6 months of 2020, Apple challenged only 4% of requests for customer data and generally complied with 80 to 85% of requests to hand over customer data, which is incredible. So there's a real sense of, am I safe to record stuff onto my device and onto my phone? And have we let the genie out of the bottle? And how hard is it to put that back in?
Absolutely. We're all sharing so much of this data now, aren't we? Almost without thinking about it, wherever we are based. So those of you who are listening to us in the US, and we know we do have listeners there, our hearts go out to you at this really awful time, and we are thinking of you.
Certainly. In the BBC article as well, there's some really useful stuff on how you can protect your data. Some really simple rules, so we'll share that. And actually, we should look and try and share some stuff that's. I think there's another challenge around the amount of data that our kids are sharing as well, inadvertently. I think it's just shone a light back on this question, and I'm really conscious that my kids are starting to use their devices more and make more decisions for themselves about the type of information they're sharing online. So I think we'll try and dig out something that we can share.
Super. Yeah, do share the links with me and I'll pop in the show notes. Now for a conversation with Beth and Kit, heads of digital at Tearfund. We are very excited to welcome not one, but two guests to Start at the Top today. We are very happy to welcome Beth Parfitt, who's Head of Digital at Tearfund, and Kit Powney, who's Head of Digital and Digital Maturity at Tearfund. And they undertake their roles as a job split. And we're really, really excited to explore all that and more, and how we can introduce more flexible working into senior digital roles on this episode of Starts at the Top. So welcome, Kit, and welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's really good to be here, both of us.
We're really excited to be here. It's been an exciting opportunity to talk more about flexible working.
Absolutely. And just our first conversations with both of you a few weeks ago, it really struck me that we don't actually see a lot of senior digital job shares across the sector. In fact, the only one that I can think of right now is Bex Ray Evans and Johnny Ray Evans over at Snook, actually. And that's not a charity, that's an agency. So please do write in with your examples, listeners, if you have any that we haven't yet heard about. So let's talk about the practicalities first of all. So it's a job split rather than a job share. Can you walk us through how it works and what you both do?
Sure. So it's kind of evolved slightly. So I am in the role of Head of Digital. I went off on maternity leave in 2020, and when I was coming back to work, wanted a bit of flexibility, didn't want to work 5 days a week. So basically said I wanted to come back and do 4 days a week. And I guess that left an opportunity. There is enough to do in the role. And actually speaking with my line manager at the time, it was a case of, well, actually we don't want to lose some of this work by doing less. So actually looked at whether there was an opportunity to kind of slice a bit of the role and separate that off and get that to be its own sort of role or own entity. And Kit, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about how that kind of came about for you.
So I went, I was also in the digital team before. I was the digital content and engagement manager, so looking at day-to-day running and sort of content strategy. And then I, shortly after Beth left, also went off on maternity leave to have twins. So that was a roller coaster in itself, a great one. But when I was looking at coming back to work, obviously the cost of childcare is very expensive. So then when you double it, me and my husband were like, it's just not actually possible really for me to return back to work initially, is what we were thinking. But yeah, I really love Tearfund. I love working for Tearfund. I really love the digital team. It's a really great place to work. So when I was talking to my manager, we were saying this role is like going to come up. Do you think it'd be something you'd be interested in applying to? It's obviously working in strategy. You've already been working in strategy, so it could be quite a good fit. And at that time, I was thinking I could probably do a day a week, and my husband could do the childcare. So actually, it was like really just a great place for me to come back to work. It's been really encouraging, and also just I feel like if more charities and organisations were open to, flexible working, even 1 day a week, which is a challenge at times. I think actually we see a lot more mums returning to the workforce.
I think that's such a great point you've mentioned, Kit, because before we started the recording, and we'll obviously talk a bit more about this later, I was looking on Mother Pucker's Instagram, who runs the Flex Appeal campaign, and we're going to be discussing flexible working practices a bit more as we get further into the conversation. And I'm sure I saw her post something about how childcare costs have gone up 44% over the time that Tories have been in power. And what you've made me think of there, and it's such an important point we are not talking enough about in digital careers, is that there are not enough senior women in tech, and this is going to be a big part of why that happens. That the cost of childcare is just extortionate, isn't it?
Yeah, we a lot of the nurseries around us wouldn't take our girls for less than a day, and then the ones that would take them for a day, it would be £180 for both of them for a day, which is a lot of money. So then you do have the question of like, is it even worthwhile going back to work? And then you obviously miss out on opportunities to progress your career, learn more, and also just have that time to develop your career and things that you love. Like I love working, I love coming to work. and it's great to be able to do that. So I think it's a real shame that more organisations aren't willing to have more flexible working. I think a lot of women are still quite cautious to ask their employer for things. It can feel like anything your employer is going to do is almost like a favour for you. Often at playgroups and stuff, I'll hear other mums talking about, oh, I don't want to have the conversation with my manager, I don't think they're going to let me. And there's just quite a lot of guilt and sort of fear around it, which is really sad.
It's so hard, isn't it? I remember my NCT group back in the day, there were quite a lot of senior women. I think there were some senior women in tech actually as well. And suddenly there was this whole shift in the power dynamic of people previously feeling quite empowered to suddenly, oh my gosh, can I ask for this thing? And actually it's a very reasonable thing to be asking for. It's, you know, it's something all employers should be providing, in my view.
I definitely think there's something as well about, there's a traditional view of kind of job sharing, which is maybe like, is that sort of, I do half the week, you do half the week, and we try and work out some sort of handover, or, you know, or yeah. And I think actually it's about coming at it from a slightly different angle of like, well, what does the role require? What does the organisation need from this sort of resource and capacity? And how do we meet that? And it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to look a particular way maybe, but it's actually about, it is about being flexible to the people that are doing that role. So actually I think it's really unique that, you know, I'm doing 4 days and Kit's doing 1, and there are logistical challenges with that, but that's given Kit the flexibility that she needs, because, you know, like for those reasons financially it wouldn't necessarily be worth it, but actually it's giving her a way to work, you know, to keep her kind of hat in the ring, as it were, and to meet that sort of individual need you have to, you know, keep challenging your brain and not just be constantly in child's land, which is a hard place to be sometimes. So yeah, I think actually it's been really, really good to sort of be on that journey and work out what that looks like at Tearfund, and know that we've had the support to sort of make it work in a slightly different way.
Yeah. So it sounds like your managers were really open to that, which is really great.
Yeah, I think one of the things I know when we had a conversation before, you were asking was sort of what sort of culture and what can other organisations do to encourage more job splits, job shares. I think for us, we've had really encouraging senior management and incredibly supportive. And I think also like realistic in terms of, I'm working 7 hours a week. That is quite a limited amount of time to up in digital maturity and think about different areas for growth. But I've been given the freedom, like, don't go to meetings that you don't have to. You don't have to go to all of the corporate stuff because you've got these 7 hours and we really want you to focus on that. But there's also not the pressure of like, if you don't deliver these things, you know, we've given you these 7 hours. It's very much like an encouraging environment, and anything you're doing, and this is a brilliant thing because actually before there was less capacity to even focus on it. And so I think anything an organisation can do to actually think about the like logistics of the job share, of what will those two people need in order for it to work, to facilitate it, what support are they going to need, even like communication channels and stuff. Like Beth and I, we use Slack a lot, and that works really well for us, but for other people it will be different channels.
And how does that communication look like every week? Because I know one of the challenges when you work part-time, isn't it, it's to really time box those hours and not to end up doing stuff on the days when you're not working effectively. So how does the comms between you work?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. I think actually I had a kind of before I had a little one, I kind of couldn't quite see how, you know, it just felt like would end up being one big blur of work and family life. But actually, you know, having a demanding one, not let alone not having two, you are so, you know, have to be either in the zone or out the zone. And that's kind of, you know, so I think we've managed, and maybe I think we do support each other to manage that well. So we're like try and be quite respectful of the days that someone isn't working, but also Slack in a channel like that means that we can kind of dip in and out. So we leave each other messages there. And, you know, we'll update each other on sort of big things and little things on there, like just FYIs, or, you know, here's a project, not sure if you've seen it, not sure if you need to do anything with this, but kind of just dropping stuff all the time in there to sort of basically trust that the other will receive that when they need, when's relevant for them, and do something with it if they need to. So it's quite informal, actually. And I think, there's a couple of things that for us that's working really well. I think as Kit said before, we'd worked together in a different capacity. So being sort of part of the same team before this. So I think that probably is a factor of, there's a level of trust that's been built, and we know each other, we know each other's communication style, and we kind of have been able to lean on that in this situation. I think if it was brand new people in a role, maybe there'd be other challenges. But yeah, I think ultimately trust that we're going to keep each other informed of the necessary things, and then just kind of really solid communication, using channels like Slack, or using kind of or just pinging each other emails, and being really respectful of our sort of time boundaries as well. Okay, I don't know if there's anything else specifically. Any examples you can think of?
I think you communicated that brilliantly. I think there's probably one meeting that I go to, which is it's quite a new one at Tearfund, and it's trying to bring all of the digital and technology work packages and oversight into one space as like a governance group. And it's a new meeting. We're still trying to figure out how it works, and we're looking at like innovation. What does that look like at Tearfund? So it's quite exciting. But that is a meeting that, if Beth was there as well, it would also be a great benefit. But you don't work on that day, so we're trying to figure out how do I keep Beth up to date in that area as well. And there is often lots of stuff that comes up in that meeting, like what's our approach to innovation in a digital space. That's definitely a conversation we both want to be involved in. So making sure that Beth's got enough time to feed into it, and that I'm also making sure that in the meeting, whatever is happening, I'm thinking about what does this mean for the rest of the digital team, and the different work packages that they're working on that I'm not seeing in the day-to-day, because I'm only working on my 7 hours. So there is a bit of juggling around there. But yeah, I think if, say, like I or Beth left tomorrow and someone else was to come into the role, I think we probably have to sit down and think, like Beth said, like whoever the new person is, like how do you communicate? What do you find stressful in the workplace? Like, do you like to be communicated on Google Chat, or would you prefer it by email? And, really try and figure out what would be a great way of working. Because at the moment it feels very easy and relaxed, and it's working really well, which is great. So yeah.
I was just going to say, isn't it? It's so often that those things, so meetings are things that work reasonably well to fit into a 7-hour day. It's often the asynchronicity of work, and having to think about, well, what is it that I need to share, and have I got the time to share that in the right channel before the end of the day, so that it is picked up next week by the rest of the team. So I find Zoe as well spent most of this week writing. It's that side of things that can take the time and sort of take you away. So do you find that those 7 hours do often extend? How protective of those are you, and how do you work that?
I think in general they can't really extend, because my twins are toddlers and they're quite excited about life, shall we say.
Yeah.
And we're in a 2-bed flat as well, so there's not much space to laptop. And in true like digital working parent, they just love laptops and things. Can't get away from them. But I think as well, my manager's also been very encouraging of me keeping my work boundaries, and that I do have little ones, and that does have a tax and a cost. So please don't work into the evenings. He's just really encouraging in that, and really mindful of it, which is absolutely brilliant. But I think with any job, you have times, don't you, where you do have to put in a couple of extra hours, like ahead of like a presentation, or when you just really need to dig into some work. And at the moment, I'm actually working my 7 hours across 2 mornings. So I think probably the challenge for me is I leave the house and I've just been like, wheels on the bus go round and round. And then I'm like, digital maturity, let's think strategy, big thoughts. So I think for me, it's more, I'm trying to get into practice of coming into the office and this being my workspace, and that's it. So I can really focus. But that head switch is an interesting place sometimes.
To be honest, most of the organisations I've worked with around digital change and transformation could do with some of the lessons being taught to them as nursery rhymes, so that they actually stick and they actually do something with them. So I think you might have a unique selling point there to being able to interpret some of the stuff that we all need to do better through the medium of Ryan.
Watch this space.
We will.
I look forward to those rhymes, absolutely. And it's so interesting hearing you two talk this through, because it feels like the default that you've got is about asynchronous communication. It's about trust as a given. It's about boundaries. And it's sort of about the personalization of the employee experience, isn't it? Because I think one of the reasons why, to be really honest with you, I moved away from working in-house at organizations was because there was a sense of it's one size fits all. It's, you have to fit in with us. Whereas feels like for both of you, it's a case of these two women are really talented. We need to benefit from their strengths and their expertise and their skills. So let's find a way to make these roles happen and to get the most from them, and also to give them a good experience.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something about the organization benefiting from there being two heads looking at like hard things. And there's so many occasions where Kit and I are able to just kind of like that stuff between us. And, actually it feels so valuable to be able to do that at a peer level. So I think there's obviously, if you're in a digital, a multidisciplinary digital team, and you've got people at different levels, that's also great, and you can bat stuff around and have that super sort of collaborative. But there's something really unique, I think, about being able to do it with another digital sort of expert at the same level. And Kit and I have really are able to have quite kind of frank conversations about where the challenges are, and we're lucky to have colleagues in other roles that really endorse and want digital kind of maturity to be a thing, but it's not quite the same. Like the language, you still speak a slightly different language sometimes, or so it just feels like when Kit and I are able to sort of get our heads together on something, the value, it's doubled. So I think there's definitely a benefit to that. And one thing I would say on that though is recognizing that actually, we are both of a very similar demographic in terms of we're both, white females that have just returned to work after maternity leave, very similar age. We actually live in the same area. And actually, I think I can see a scenario where actually having an even more diverse job share, or having a diverse job share, would be an even greater a greater way of including more voices and having different perspectives, and an even richer experience potentially for that job share. So I think that's something to think about as well. As it may be in some ways it's easy for us to communicate and to just, because we've worked together, we have this way of being able to, but I think there could be a challenge there to sort of push into more of doing that, and what that could look like in a even more diverse situation. Something to think about.
Pretty good point, isn't it? That you have somebody that you can sort of if you're not sure of the answer to something, or you're working something through, you've got someone there that can add an extra voice into that. The amount of times that could be used in other areas of the business, not just digital, where there is another voice with lived experience or a completely different experience to the one that the leader or the person working on the project actually has, can just add that in a small way at the end of a busy week, to have the input from somebody that really just has a completely different perspective would be massively valuable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is so helpful to have that built into the role, isn't it? And then just coming back to your learnings from this experience, is there anything which you think, God, if we could wave a magic wand and we could make things work even more successfully, what would you like to change?
Do you know what we were saying? Because it's relatively early days in that, we've been doing this since when did you come back, Kit? January. But it feels like relatively early days because actually at the time, Kit is working 7 days a week. So actually that's essentially, I can't do the maths, but it's not that many days, as many as you might think it is. And actually we feel really fortunate that we haven't come up against any major challenges. So when reflecting about what we would do differently, it's hard because I think sometimes we're like, well, it feels really easy, and it just feels, I guess, like all of the good stuff and none of the bad stuff. But I guess maybe, yeah, there are challenges around sort of around there are times when, you know, it'd be amazing, I think, for us to both be in the room at more things together, like, not in the room, in the virtual room, and that, you know, and sometimes that handover means that we are spending a lot of time passing stuff on. And I think actually there might be situations where we should probably, you know, going into them together would be really powerful and really beneficial as well. But that makes, you know, it's hard to sort of always schedule that. Yeah, I don't know, Kit, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, it's been about 6 months, and at the moment it feels like it's going really well. We've been intentional about, like we had a conversation, how do we want to keep each other up to date? Do we want to have a meeting each week, or, you know, do an email? And yeah, we've sort of settled on Slack, so that seems to be working. And then we'll do like a Google Hangouts if there's something more important, or yeah, send an email or forward a document. But I think it probably is more the, like, say if we're doing like a team workshop or a workshop for the department, it is harder to get us both in the room, but it would be great if we were both there. So I think being able to facilitate that better somehow, and some of that's to do with the split of the hours. I think if you're doing more of a traditional job share, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, someone else Thursday, Friday, it is easier to swap stuff around.
Is there anything that the rest of the organisation would look at you to as a great example of, and who have adopted themselves? So, for example, does the rest of the organisation use Slack, and do they use it in a similar way to you, in that asynchronous way? Anything that they've looked at and said, oh, do you know what, we should be doing it exactly that way, like Beth and Kit?
Oh, good question. I think maybe, so the Slack was something we've been using as a digital team. Basically, we were sort of dabbling in it before lockdown, and then when like lockdown started, it was like it became the default thing. Like, I don't know how we would all kind of get by without it right now. And I think, yeah, actually, I can see where there are teams maybe in the organisation that haven't quite found that way of working, and how challenging it can be, versus teams that are able to, you know, found their channel. But also, it's not about, I guess it's the thing of like, it's not always about the channel, right? But it's about what it enables you to do. And there are other things that we've sort of been able to do in that collaboration space that have, I think, really helped us. So I think one thing that we mentioned before, Zoe, when we chatted, was around this thing where we, as soon as lockdown hit, we did a workshop as a team on our user manuals, which was basically kind of a point to find out from each other on kind of how we like to work, the times we like to work, the best ways to communicate with us, things that we need, things that we love, and just this kind of snapshot view of us as people. And we haven't revisited it for a while. I think we need to, but that really, something like that really kind of kick-started a kind of a culture, I guess, in the digital team of being really like person-centered, and being kind of meeting people where they're at. And, you know, yeah, Slack as a tool for us became that kind of collaborative space that kept us all in touch in a way that I think we couldn't be without really now.
I love user manuals. For anyone who hasn't used them before, do you want to say a bit more about what they involve?
Yeah, so we ended up running a workshop, I think, where we used Mural, and we had a template, and it's basically like a grid with these, well, there were sort of 9 bits in the grid. So we had conditions I like to work in, the times and hours I like to work, the best ways to communicate with me, the ways I like to receive feedback, things I need, things I struggle with, things I love, other things to know about me, and a photo of me, because, you know, why not? Cheeky little face doesn't go amiss. So we all created these user manuals, and then in a workshop, and then shared them with each other. And it was meant to be this kind of reference point of just, you know, and just checking in and saying what works for me individually, what doesn't. And I think, you know, the crucial thing is coming back to that and knowing that actually that can change for people really regularly. And I'm sure if we come back to that now, I mean, things will look really different for Kit and I, because we've had children. So though, like, mine would be entirely different. yeah, I think maybe, the tool, it's a tool, isn't it? It's a way to facilitate a conversation that at the time was a really important conversation to have, and maybe we'd come at it differently now. But yeah, a really good tool if you just want to sort of sense check, I guess, where people are at and what's working for them and what isn't.
I really like that idea. And I really like the idea, because we're all sort of video based, of you getting it printed up on t-shirts. So your picture's automatically there, and then everything is underneath. So if people aren't sure, it's like, don't talk to me unless I've got a cup of coffee in my hand in the morning. Don't bother. That's really good. I really like that idea. And actually, it's a really nice technique for onboarding new people as well.
Definitely, yeah. I think we had new people at the time, so it was, and yeah, I think it's doing that every time someone else starts as a sort of check-in with everyone. It's just like a quick fire way to get to know someone, isn't it? To know what makes them tick and what they love to do. Yeah.
It also just shows some of your culture straight away off the bat. I think so many people sort of join organizations having seen a job advert or the website or social media or knowing somebody that works there. But when you arrive day one and are asked to sort of, how do you want to work? It just really opens up a brand new conversation, especially after the last couple of years where we're all struggling to find our feet and find our way back into the workplace. It's a really neat idea. I'd be really keen to, obviously, we're going to have lots of listeners, hopefully, that are listening to this conversation and are sitting there thinking, well, how could we approach this? So do you have any advice for leaders or other teams in other organizations that are looking, not job sharing, but job splits, and you might get a lot of phone calls from people that are saying, can we have a chat with you both? Obviously not only on a working day, but lots of phone calls from people saying, how can we adopt this and what can we do to get stuck in ourselves?
I think one of the things is probably wider organisational culture. I think Tearfund in general has always had quite a flexible approach to work. And then I think the pandemic has just sort of accelerated that, as it has for so many organisations and charities. And I think that culture of, we actually acknowledge that you have a life outside of work and we want to really value you as a worker, but also that there are things outside of work that are also important and need time. I think that makes these situations and these conversations much easier, but also that it was what you were saying, Zoe, about that sort of personalisation of the work and of your role. So the user manual is a great way to understand someone and how you can help them, say if you're managing them, how you can help get the best of them out in their role, how you can help give them feedback so they can improve in a way that they're going to really appreciate. So I think it's thinking all about how is your culture going to really embrace this change, because you could put job shit. Oh.
I'll edit that out, don't worry.
Or keep it in, because that's probably what it feels like in some organisations.
I was going to say that might be what it's called.
Amazing, love it. It could have been worse, right? It could have been worse.
So worse. I'll blame that on your parent brain. I actually rocked up and realised, I looked down and there was a stain on my top as well, and I was like, oh, classic parent going to work. Anyway.
Oh, I have that all the time, honestly, and my kids are ancient, so it just happens once you have children. They're just Weetabix everywhere.
True. Well, what I was saying was, I think some organisations, if you put in a job split or a job share without really thinking about how the rest of the team or the rest of the department are going to engage with it, and there not really being an understanding of what it means, I think it's probably going to create more challenges and potentially a lot of duplication of conversations or expectations of different people that aren't actually their roles. So I think it's thinking about your culture and how is your culture really going to create a space that supports these roles.
I think that's a really good point, because I think actually it hasn't really battered many people's up. People haven't paid that much attention to us doing this in quite a nice way. It's not doesn't feel like there's this big shining light on us of oh, they're doing this novel thing where it, and even the team, I guess because we have got maybe the split element of it being quite distinct makes it quite easy for people to know they come to me for this. And actually, in more cases, they come to me because I'm working more hours. And actually, Kit's role is this sort of, more protected time where I guess, people know, your time's limited. So I think it just helps that there's the perception of it is quite relaxed. We're quite able to just crack on. And yeah, like Kit said, the flexible nature of wider. So there's other people that have got variations on flexible working, mean that it isn't a huge deal, and it just works for the context that we're in. So I guess that's going to be different depending on what the existing culture is in the organisation. But I guess just testing it, and I guess the challenge could be if it goes wrong, then it could go badly wrong in terms of if the communication there isn't, if the trust isn't there. But I think you have to trust that it will be easy, it will be good, and yeah, I think, like we've said, we've had a really positive experience, so can only speak positively of it at this stage, and hopefully in the future.
I had a conversation online the other day about whether we should talk about was it employee engagement or employee alignment, and I really didn't like the term alignment because it just felt like getting in line behind something, which just feels a little bit weird. But that whole engagement piece is so hard to get right in organizations, and mostly because people are finding actually doing the job across 5 days in a week is challenging because there's too much dead space and things. I've seen people in organizations who literally sort of moving a pen from one side of the desk to the other is what they do, but you're forced in this way to really sort of knuckle down on the issue, on the job at hand, and really make it work for you in the time that you actually have to do it. Maybe that's a bit of a different stance, and maybe that's a reflection of not just the culture, but also the ability of the organization to flex in the way that this new sort of work environment is allowing us to do.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that takes us on really nicely to inclusion, actually, and also, you both started from, sort of in the wake of returning to work as well. So it'd be great to hear a bit about that. I know before the call started, we were talking about where there's perhaps some room for improvement in the charity sector. So what kind of support did you both get when you were returning to work, and are there things that other charities could learn from?
Yeah, one thing that Tearfund do is a parent buddy scheme, which I have benefited from. So basically just putting parents in touch with other parents and extending a sort of warm welcome back, and just checking in on how that juggle is going, which I think is a really nice and simple thing to be able to do. So that's been great. In terms of as Kit said, we've got a very supportive line manager who sat me down very early on and said, your life's very different now, work and family. He's a dad of two, so having that shared experience, is helpful. Saying actually sometimes there's going to be days when the struggle is just so real and you can't give 100%, and that's okay, because you will give 100% the next day. So I think just that it was such an empowering conversation for me coming back into work, of just gave me, just made me realize that I actually felt like I joined the secret parent club where we all were suddenly like, oh yeah, I know what it's like. The juggle's real and you just do what you've got to do. And I was like, wow, this is a good place to be, because I guess there's empathy for one another. Everyone knows how hard it can be at times. I guess that's, the parent club is a big one, but actually I guess seeing that within other where there are other people that need other flexibility for whatever reason, just having that empathy and that support from your line manager or from your employer is such a huge deal, and means you can be present then when you do turn up to work, because you can just be real about what's going on for you. I've been super grateful for that feeling and that culture.
What about you, Kit? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's just been really supportive, and even sort of when I was on maternity leave and having keep in touch days, and it's sort of been like, have you had any thoughts about coming back? If you don't want to talk about it right now, that's fine. We're here to have the conversation if and when you want to. It was all very encouraging and welcoming, but also just very open and honest conversations. Like I felt like I could say how I was feeling rather than sort of say something and hope it came across in the right way. You know, it didn't feel like really hard conversations. It was just really simple and like, this is what I want to do and how does that work for Tearfund, and you know, then figuring out what options there were. And yeah, it was just a really positive experience in that way. And then I think as well, other colleagues as well getting in touch and being like, how are you feeling about coming back to work, and different things like that. I think as well, there's, you know, you have imposter syndrome whenever you start sort of a new job. And then I think there's also like a mum version, or a dad version. If you've had paternity leave, you return to work and you feel like this new person and you're sort of like, how do I do my job again? And you know, there's that. So I think as well, a lot of charities and organisations could think about how do they help people find that confidence again, because most people, you know, leave the workforce feeling, I'm doing a really good job and I'm going off to have my baby and it's gonna be great, and you sort of come back and you're like, oh, I feel a bit all over the place and hormonal and lots of things have changed and the workplace has changed and my team has changed and what's happened, I don't know. Like there's a lot there. So I actually did a little bit of prep before coming back to work, like sort of reading books, listening to podcasts to try and get my head back into the space. I know not everyone will find that helpful, but I found it helpful to be a little bit more encouraged returning.
Maybe you could recommend a couple of, we can put them in the show notes, a couple of things that you found particularly useful. I mean, I was going to add that you mentioned men, and I had 2 weeks paternity leave with each child. 2 weeks is very different to taking 9 months, a year off. So you come back and you sort of get stuck back into the work. But I wouldn't argue that the attitude to work, not the attitude perhaps, but just the perspective, the new perspective that you have to work is something that I think I wish and probably was there from my line manager at the time, because she was a woman and probably understood a little bit of what I was coming back to. But knowing that it was okay I had a sense, I think, in a couple of performance reviews around the time my children were young, that I wasn't progressing in the way that I wanted to necessarily. And probably because mentally I was taking a back seat to the role, and or having to be that parent in a very sort of male dominated environment where everyone was really working hard to sort of get to the next rung on the ladder, of leaving early to go to nursery and pick my kids up 3 days a week because my wife was working. And those sorts of things do change your relationship with work. So I'm not comparing it at all, because I think it is very, very different for women and men. But I do recognise when I've come across men who have just had young families, that their attitude to work might not quite match my own, because my kids are older and because they're more established and they don't need me as much.
I think that is such a good point. Like I feel like my eyes were totally open to it, having like going through it and seeing how my husband, like similar experience, like how my husband sort of had to force back into work, you know, when you've just gone through, he had a month off, but it just been through this. I think with COVID, that's a whole new dynamic of dads being at home with babies. Like we've got 2 dads who've both got like 6 months old in our team, and you know, we often hear baby on the call and they're like, oh, you know, and it's just such a different dynamic of, it's no longer you can't kind of where you're going to your place of work and, you know, that's work and this is home. And yeah, dads are having, you know, they've gone through the same massive life shift, and yeah, I think loads more to be done to help kind of that men returning to work as well. And also 2 weeks is nothing, right? Like when you've just been through this, and I mean, didn't your husband Kit have 2 weeks off with slightly longer maybe with the twins? But that blew my mind. Like Kit was suddenly going to have to do all this stuff on her own with 2 little people. Bonkers.
Yeah, I think me and my husband have also been having conversations around, like, you know, future jobs. He's like, do I go for another job right now? Because actually life is so full on outside of work. Like, you know, is that something I should be doing? And before kids, that wasn't even a question. You know, it's like, yeah, you go for a new job, it's a new opportunity, see if you get it, you know, it'd be great, do lots of learning. So I think there is a whole other angle just to like family dynamics and working when you do have little ones that are so dependent on you. And obviously the challenges change as your parenting children of different ages and still trying to work. It's not like it's only when you've got really little kids. But yeah, I think the working at home with newborns and babies, and just even that tension of, like my husband would say, you know, I'd be on a call and I'd hear them screaming and I feel like I'm being a bad dad because I'm not coming to get you, but I also can't leave a work call to get a baby. Although actually his colleagues were often like, bring one in, and then they try and guess which it was. But yeah, I think there is more work there to be done as well to support dads.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe something for us to look at in a future episode, actually. And I hope that more dads will come forward and talk about the challenges they face in this area as well. And you're right. I think there is absolutely value in the new perspective that people bring when they have any time out of the workplace. So whether it's having a child, whether perhaps it's taking some time out for other caring responsibilities or a sabbatical. I remember really clearly when I came back to work after I had my first baby, that fresh perspective you have it's a real gift, isn't it? So it's great that Tearfund are making most of that opportunity. So I'm really, really pleased for you both, and always so excited to hear about the success you're making of your job split. It's wonderful. It's really inspiring for the sector. So thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an interesting conversation. It's really going to inspire lots of other organisations. I hope that lots of charities will take it to heart, especially at a time when it's so hard to find good, skilled digital people for senior roles, and especially because we need more women in these senior roles as well, and also more people of colour and more people from diverse backgrounds. And this feels like a really good way to do that. So thank you so much for sharing your story today and inspiring more people across the sector to think creatively about recruitment.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been great to meet both of you and chat a little bit more.
Thank you, Kit, and thank you, Beth.
Thank you very much.
Thanks both. Thank you so much to Beth and Kit for joining us on Starts at the Top. A really lovely chat, and I wonder how many other examples will emerge of digital job sharing, how much we'll see in the future.
I really hope we do see more examples, especially because we all know there's a big shortage of skills and candidates coming through for digital roles in charities right now. So I hope that their story will inspire others to go down a similar route. And in our next episode, we will also be talking about the importance of diversity and inclusivity in digital leadership. We'll be talking to Wincy Wong, Head of Services Workforce Technical Capability at NatWest.
Yeah, a great pair of episodes as we begin to round out another season of the podcast. So, as usual, please leave us your feedback. And if you use the podcast app where you can rate and review us, please do so. You can share your plans, your ideas or questions with us on Twitter. We're at Starts at the Top 1, and you can email us at startstoppodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you in a couple of weeks.